from here. Amber, it's your show.
Thank you, Bob. And thanks everybody for joining us again. As Bob said, today we're going to talk about grasses. And the next time we'll cover trees and shrubs, and then wrap it up on May 13th with vines. So bring those questions specific to those species groups on those dates. Any of those plants that you may be controlling on your property and you have questions about, bring your questions to those dates. So thanks again to Purdue Extension for hosting this session of programs. We look forward to talking about trees and shrubs next time. In addition to our presentation, I wanted to mention we are putting together a nice box folder online that will have a lot of fact sheets in it, ways that you can manage those plants that we discuss. And then in addition to that, we will have other plants that we maybe didn't cover in the presentation, but other invasives that you could be working on identifying as well. So that will be in a great big box folder that all of you can go through at your leisure at the end of the program. So we're going to move on to the next slide here. So we're covering invasive grasses today. Just wanted to show the map of the Indiana Invasives Initiative. If you were unable to join us maybe last time for the herbaceous plants, I wanted to show you guys the map of where we all are located across the state as regional specialists. So you can see I'm based in Vigo County, and you can see all the counties that I cover. And then everyone else is color-coded to correspond with their county. So no matter where you are in the state, you can reach out to your regional specialist if you have questions about potentially identification of a plant or how to manage that species. If you're not sure if it's invasive, of course, you want to make sure you ID that correctly before you start to manage it. And then we have a whole bunch of events and activities to engage our landowners and our community members. So you want to get in touch with your closest regional specialist so you can figure out what's going on in your area and so you can get involved. So there's a lot of talent all across the state just waiting to help you out. I touched on this last time, but I'm gonna do this pretty much every session, is what is an invasive species? And so we need to talk about that before we talk about controlling them. An invasive is something that is non-native, and when I talk about an invasive species, I am particularly referring to something that is non-native in Indiana. So we're not talking about any other state, we're talking about our state in Indiana. And those invasive species are causing harm or likely to cause harm. And so there are species across our state that we are keeping an eye on, that we're noticing have invasive tendencies and are starting to show some real invasions across our state. So those are potentially going to be added to our invasive species list. And they're causing harm to our economy, our environment, and also harm to health. So harm to human, animal, and plant health. And when I say animal, it could be our pets, it could also be our livestock, and of course, our wildlife. You may wonder what those pictures are. The berry plant is Asian bittersweet, and we will talk about that vine at the end of the series. Then we have the wild feral hogs that are luckily only in a small population in Indiana, and then the emerald ash borer insect there that has taken out a lot of our ash trees. So those are all invasive species in our state. SICM primarily focuses on plants, so that's what you'll hear our regional specialists talk about quite a bit. This document will be in that box folder, but we want to cover it. So this is our calendar of control. These are ways that you can start addressing some of these invasives. Given that this is a general calendar, you need to think about where you live in the state and what that plant is doing currently where you live. So you'll see on this calendar, some of them say don't control it if it's in flower. So if it's in flower in your county, you want to look to maybe controlling something differently. You'll see that it's broken down into months. and then color coded with what you should be doing that time of the month. And so you will look at that color and then go down to the bottom of that document, and it's corresponding to that color, and it'll tell you what we would recommend as far as using an herbicide. Manual control we will also talk about, but this document covers herbicide. You'll also see that we say always read the label. So no matter what herbicide we recommend and then you go out and purchase, make sure that you're reading that label front to back, because it will tell you everything you need to know about how to use it. Last time we talked about herbaceous plants, so this is on the back side of that document. Today we're going to cover grasses, and then the bottom there you see that we'll talk about trees next time. Today there's only 3 on this document, but today we'll talk about 6 different grass species and how to control them. So if you have any questions about these grasses, please definitely put those in the comment section. And I also will put together a document that has some of the 50 most common grass species, native, non-native, and also invasive in our state. That will be in the box folder for you. So you'll see at the base of this document, you will see glyphosate, aquatic label, you see triclopyr, imazapyr. Those are just some brand examples of that type of herbicide. So you hear Roundup used a lot to define glyphosate. Roundup is not the only glyphosate, okay? So those are just some of the brand suggestions, just to give you an idea of what we're talking about. You also see on there surfactant. So those are also some brand examples of surfactants you can use. But those are not the only ones out there. Next time I will also cover some of the methods. So you see foliar spray, basal bark, cut surface treatment, those types of things. We'll talk about what that means in the next session. So we will cover that during the trees and shrubs. Okay, before you get started with identifying those grasses, you might need to know what the basic parts of the grass plant are. And looking at that, you might think, wow, this is quite complicated. If you can just identify some of these, it'll help you maybe if you're trying to get an identification on a grass and you're sending what you know currently to perhaps a professional, maybe one of your regional specialists. It would be helpful if you knew just a few of these things, or if you could get pictures of these parts. That's very helpful. That will help us identify a grass via pictures through text and or email. If you are identifying grasses, it's helpful to have a loop there that you can see pictured. And I like to have ones that are have a little light in them, so they're illuminated. That's really helpful. Usually a jeweler's loop has a little light in it. That's just my personal preference. And then if you have a microscope at home and you take that grass home, you're going to get a really good look at it as well. So you can see there are small little parts of that grass plant that are going to help you really identify it. And a loop and a microscope are some of the best tools you can have for identifying grasses. The documents that I'm putting together for you will help you identify. They're going to point out all those little parts of those grasses for you. This is just an example, a little section of the document. So when you're looking at identifying Timothy grass, for example, which is what is pictured, a non-native grass, you want to look at the node, the sheath, the ligule, and then if you have any of the flowers, of course, we want to see those, and identifying how it's growing. Does it have rhizomes? Is it growing on in a dense mat on the surface? These are all good things to start to identify so that we can properly put our finger on what exactly you're looking at. So you have all those pictures, you have all that information, and now it's time to identify. Wanted to cover a grass that you're going to start seeing pop up, hopefully not on your property, but you might be seeing it out on trails or along roadways. It tends to take over those areas. It's called Japanese stilt grass. You can see it was introduced a long time ago, 1919, as packing material. And now we see it spread rapidly across our state. It will grow in a wide variety of habitats. That is a trait of many invasive plants, is they will take over just about anywhere they can get roots in. This is an annual grass, so it has to go to seed and produce that seed to continue on to the next year. It can also spread vegetatively. The seeds will attach to animals. And we found that if you're mowing it, you actually could be making the infestation worse by unknowingly dragging those seeds around in your tires of your mower or on your shoes and in your equipment. So mowing it along roadways, we've noticed, really spreads it. It easily replaces native ground cover in 3 to 5 years. There are some forest habitats where stilt grass has come in accidentally, maybe on a mower, on a path, and now it has spread in the dense understory and it has taken over. All the wildflowers are no longer there. So it outcompetes all of those native plants that we all have loved. If you're doing a fire through your woods, it can also impede that activity. So if you're trying to do any type of woodland fire, Japanese stilt grass might stop that. So you can see in the image there how thick it gets. And in particular in Vigo County, I've noticed it is all along the county roads. So this is one that you definitely want to identify as soon as you can. Stop it before it goes to seed. So here's some control ideas for you. If you notice it in a small area, hand pulling is ideal. It has a really shallow root system and it pulls out of the ground really easily. You want to make sure that you're properly disposing of those plants if you do pull them from the ground. You don't want to just leave them there. I like to bag them just as you would bag, say, garlic mustard. You can trim it really low with, say, a weed eater if it's not in seed. If it's just coming up and you want to keep it trimmed back, you can trim it low. But we've also started to find out that this plant will produce a seed even at the base of the ground. So you may not know that there's seeds on there. It's just trying to essentially save itself. And so it'll produce a seed right along the soil. So it's not always ideal to try and trim it. It's kind of a tricky plant to control. If you do mow it, you want to make sure you're cleaning off your mower before you leave that site. And you don't want to be doing that when there's any type of seed head. So you want to make sure that you're checking that plant before you mow it. Make sure there's no seeds. You can smother it if it's a small area, essentially putting a tarp on it and laying a bunch of mulch on top of that. We're doing some studies on that, and whether or not it works, we'll get back to you on it. Not so sure it's going to work. I've tried it, and it essentially just acted as a greenhouse, and it came right back the next year. So it's something to try. If you're going to use a chemical, you can use pre-emergent. But if you're in an aquatic area, you do not want to use pre-emergent. And most of them are not labeled aquatic label. So you want to be very careful with that. Foliar applications where you spray the leaves, and you can do that in mid-season. Found really good success of doing that in July, early July. And again, that depends on where you're at and how that plant is growing in the current situation you're in. So you want to keep an eye on it. You just want to make sure you stop it before it goes to seed. It will readily take over your yard as well. So keep an eye on it. Don't let it get a hold of your yard. Don't let it get all along your trails. If it's in your yard and you have trails through your woods, you want to make sure you're not dragging that through your woods. One way to tell you have stilt grass is if you look at that picture, you can see that really silver line down the middle of that blade. That's a really good way to tell if you have stilt grass. It looks like a miniature bamboo. I've heard a lot of people say that. And the way that the blades grow, it's correct. It does kind of look like a low-growing bamboo. Okay, that's stilt grass. Another one that seems to grow in tandem with stilt grass, you find it together oftentimes, is small carpet grass. Several pictures there for you. So the top is going to be that seed. The middle one is as it's going to seed, and the bottom one is the flower. On the right, you can see the grass structure with the blades. It was introduced in the US from Japan and Asia, and earliest reports really come from the 1970s. So relatively new species that we've been documenting and working to manage. It does grow up to 1.5 feet tall, has those lance-shaped leaves that you can see in the picture that are 1 to 3 inches in length, sort of a heart shape at the base. It does spread by the roots at nodes. So along the ground it will spread. And by those seeds, you can see the seeds are quite plentiful. And if it's along a wet area, they do travel in the water. That kind of crimson color flower is in the summer and fall. It grows a lot in wet areas, so along stream banks and shorelines, floodplains, loves sunny, moist areas. So this is an area that you have on a property maybe you own or you manage. You want to check and make sure that carpet grass isn't taking over, because it will form dense stands just as that stilt grass. It will just be a solid mat of carpet grass. So it will threaten your native vegetation just like stilt grass will. You can see in that picture some of the flowers, what those look like all together in a dense mat. So if it's a small area, which I would consider that picture to be a small area, you can pull it or you can mow it before it produces seed. You don't want to be sending that seed everywhere by mowing it. If you do use a chemical, general use herbicides like glyphosate, and there is an aquatic label glyphosate that you could use on this grass. You'll want to do repeat applications. Generally speaking, you will need to go back to this plant and control it multiple times to make sure that you didn't miss any if you're using an herbicide, or maybe even retreat with a foliar spray. It does form very dense mats, so it can be quite easy to miss some of those leaves when you're foliar spraying. Again, if you're pulling this one, you want to make sure to bag it. Okay, moving on to Johnson grass. You might be familiar with this one. It was introduced from Eurasia in the 1800s as forage plants for livestock. It does grow really tall, up to 8 feet tall. And that says 6 to 8 feet fall, and that should be tall. Dark green leaves with white mid-vein. So similar to the Japanese stilt grass with that silver mid-vein, this one has a white. It gets a lot taller. Flowers open and they're sort of shaped like a pyramid. You can see that in the picture. It is a perennial, so once it gets established, it'll come back every year. And it spreads by those seed heads that you can see in the picture, and also by rhizomes. So it will form a dense mat of rhizomes. It likes disturbed sites, crowds out all other native plants, and can be toxic to grazers. So we introduced it as forage. Turns out it can actually be toxic to our grazers. So that's definitely one you do not want in your pasture. You can see the root system there. If it's a small area, I have pulled it before. So how do you control this one? You can do repeat mowing. That will get rid of those seedlings. So if you get it early on, you could do some mowing. And it'll actually reduce those rhizomes. So the more time that you give it to spread, it will create a thick mat of rhizomes. So try and get at it as soon as you can. You can do a spring cut, mow. You can also burn it. Allow to sprout prior to chemical control. So let it grow up a little bit and then maybe apply an herbicide. You can do a fall tillage to bring those rhizomes to the surface and expose it to the cold. If we have a really good hard winter, it can kill that plant just by exposing it, turning it all up and getting it out of the soil. And then if you're going to use a chemical, a foliar application is pretty good. But you want to get to it before it seeds. So you can see that it's in seed and flowering in that image. You don't want to foliar do application, then you'll just waste your time and money. Fall chemical application is most effective, and repeated treatments may be necessary. So if you cut it down and keep it cut down pretty low so it doesn't set seed, and then you come in with a foliar application when it's about knee to waist high, that seems to work really well if you're using foliar spray. Okay, that's Johnson grass. Moving along. Next up is reed canary grass. I have a picture of what the flower looks like and the seed heads look like. It was introduced from Europe, Asia in the 1800s, again for forage. It does grow 2 to 6 feet tall. Again, I wrote fall. But it will have these golden seed heads, the top dark green foliage. So it really gets this dark green stems or stalks on it. It is perennial, so it'll come back year and year if you let it get a control on an area. It does spread by those seed heads and by rhizomes, so similar to Johnson grass. It really likes to invade those wetland community types. Takes advantage of that water's edge especially. It will form dense stands, excluding and displacing all of your native plants, and of course, in turn, displacing all of your native wildlife. It will constrict our waterways by all those rhizomes, just taking over, and also increase those erosion areas. So how do you control it? So you can do consecutive annual burns, spring or fall. Mow mid-June and October. That'll just reduce seed and encourage some natives to take over that space. You can replace and kind of put in some native grass plugs as well as you're trying to control this. And those native grasses have have been known to outcompete this a little bit. You can use a chemical foliar application. Of course, if it's in an area where it tends to grow along waterways, you want to make sure you're using aquatic label. And after resprout. So again, cut it down, keep it managed in a way that would be okay for foliar application. So you're not spraying in you're not spraying a tall grass above your head or anything like that. And so keep it mowed back or controlled. And then after resprout, when it comes back, you can spray it with a foliar application in the fall. Now, mid-September is really good, and up until consistent frost. So that has the months of consistent frost continues to change. So just make sure that you're getting it under control before we really start having some of those hard frost nights. You can foliar spray with a 3% glyphosate, and that's what our calendar of control recommends for you. Okay, that is reed canary grass. Then common reed, a much taller grass, also known as Phragmites. This one was accidentally brought to us in a ship ballast material in late 17 to early 1800s. It is a perennial warm season grass that can get up to 15 feet tall. It has bluish green leaves, 1 to 1.5 inches wide, and those leaf sheaths, again, refer back to that diagram of the grass, will adhere tightly to that stem and persist all winter long. It is found in disturbed to pristine wet areas. In Indiana in particular, and in my region, we see it a lot around old mine grounds or existing mine ground. Especially loves to take over those spoil piles. You can see in that picture, it gets really, really tall and there's really nothing else growing. So it does exclude all native plants and then thus excluding wildlife. It alters our hydrology and degrades our habitat. Increases potential for fire hazard. So it does catch fire, especially since it persists all winter long and through the fall. It does increase a potential for fire hazard. You can see in the picture there, that is when it's in flower. And then on the right, it's kind of later in the season. At the bottom circle picture is of the sheath. Okay. This image is kind of common. That all of that in the background is Phragmites. So given the chance, it easily spreads and takes over. So the ways that you can remove this plant from your landscape, one method is prescribed burning, although use extreme caution because it does burn easily, and also it can spread those seed heads. So if it's in seed and you're burning it, those seed heads can travel within that fire burning. Cutting annually before the end of July and no sooner, okay? Doing a foliar application is what we recommend as far as chemical control goes, and Phragmites pretty much always grows near water, either in the ditch or again along spoil piles. So you want to use an aquatic label herbicide. And after the tasseling stage, when the plant is sending nutrients to the roots. So later in the year is a good time to control it. Okay. Miscanthus is our next one. This plant has many names. The reason being there's a lot of cultivars that are sold. You might have this planted in your landscaping and you didn't know it was invasive. The most recent assessment of this species of plant and all the cultivars is that it is highly invasive. What that means is it is now deemed as invasive as, say, your Eurasian bush honeysuckle, that shrub that takes over woodlands. That's also ranked highly invasive in our state. And so this grass is spreading quite rapidly. We're seeing it everywhere. So you want to look for that scientific name, Miscanthus sinensis. And if it says that, it's highly invasive in our state. But it might go by many names: maiden grass, flame grass, Chinese silvergrass is quite common and pictured, porcupine grass, morning light. All of them, however, are not native to Indiana. They're native to Asia. It is a perennial. And the growth habit, I wish I could list all of them, but it really depends on which one you have, which cultivar you're dealing with. Some of them grow 3 feet tall, some of them grow 6 feet tall, some of them in between. So it really depends on which one you have. The same goes with the leaves and the flowers. Depends on the cultivar. Leaves can be green, they can be variegated, they can be striped, they can be kind of zebra striped. The flowers can be a multitude of colors: silver, pink, purple, red, and somewhere in between. The unfortunate thing about this plant is, although it might look nice in a landscape setting, it's spreading rapidly into our natural areas and starting to really take over. And an Asian grass spreading anywhere is not good for Indiana. So found spreading into a great variety of habitats. We've seen it a lot on right-of-ways. That's what ROW is. Seen it along roadways, or if it's in a landscape setting, you look across the road and it's spread all along that road. It does form dense stands. So although it might be a nice little clump in the landscape area where you're mowing and maintaining around it, when it gets loose and invades natural areas, there are no tamed spots of this plant. It will just form a dense stand of it, thus degrading all habitat. So how do you control it? Pictured there is the green variety, just very simple green grass. How do you control it? Cultural and mechanical. You can cut annually before it sets flowers, seeds produce. So in that picture, you could cut it back and that would help to control it, because there are no flowers and no seeds. So that's a manual way that you could get rid of it. You would also dig it out. So if you've recently planted it, you could just as easily put that shovel in the ground and remove it. Chemical-wise, a foliar application of glyphosate works. April to June, and then again, August to September are those good time frames to be controlling it with a foliar application. You do want to cut it back to 6 inches. So from the ground up 6 inches to treat with a foliar spray. Again, that's so that you're not spraying on tall grass and potentially doing off-target damage or even accidentally having it drift back on you. So cut it back, keep it low, and then foliar spray it or dig it out. That is another image of one of the varieties that you will see. Okay, so we covered all those grasses, covered ways to control them. Now, what can you do? Other than identifying and removing those grasses, there are other ways you can get involved. So I wanted to put the map up for you so you can look at maybe what county you're living in and see what's going on in your county. One of the jobs of regional specialists is to form Sismus, or cooperative invasive species management areas. And these are the groups that are formed locally to help you identify those invasive species and then help you identify how to address them at that county level. They're also, in addition to doing invasive ID and management, to help you with that, they're also hosting events to engage their community members. They're creating management plans for their community members, as well as strategic plans for their groups. And with that, they're raising all sorts of awareness across their county. So you can see it's a statewide effort. We'd love for you to get involved with that. Look on the map. You know my region, but if you're not in my region, reach out to your regional specialist and they will get you involved. We also have a really great website. It is SICIM, which is sicm.info, and you can get on there and look at the map and see how to get in touch with the group that's there. If your county isn't colored in, we would love to get a group going, so definitely reach out to your closest regional specialist and we can talk about how to start that. In addition to that, since we're all at stay-at-home orders, what can you do in your county right now? Well, we've started this virtual weed wrangle, and essentially that's where you're working on those invasives on your property or maybe helping out a state park, and you're taking images and you're going to share those with us. We want to celebrate what everybody's doing right now, and I know a lot of folks are at home looking at these plants wondering what they are. Well, if you identify them as invasive and you start to remove them, we would love to see those images. That'll help us keep the momentum going and celebrate all the great things that we're doing for our state. So if you do that, we'd like for you to share those images on our Facebook page or send them to your regional specialist. And we're going to tag all of those with virtual weed wrangle, all one word. And those are all going into a nice album for us so we can go back through and see all the great work everyone's doing. I mentioned this last time, but I'll say it again. This is a great place to start if you're trying to figure out invasive species. You can download the apps on your phone. And I just found out that Android has a new app. So you want to get on your Android phones and download the EdMaps app. The Apple iPhone is still going with the Great Lakes Early Detection Network. So that's currently what you want on your iPhone. I know that might be a smidge confusing. But if you don't have a smart device, just go online to edmaps.org/Indiana. And this is going to show you all the invasive species with pictures. It'll show you if it's in your county or if it's been documented. And if you're seeing invasive plants spreading, this is going to help us develop data so that we can then address these invasives at the state level with things like the terrestrial plant rule, where now there are plants that are so invasive in our state that they're banned for sale. And so the more data we have, the better we are understanding where these invasives are, how big of a problem they are. So you guys are our citizen scientists. Download those apps, and especially right now, it's a great time to get out and start mapping some of these. We do have a really great tutorial on how to use these apps on our Facebook page, the SICM Facebook page. So you can go there. There's a nice video on there to help you navigate. Here's some of my image credits for the presentation. And with that, folks, we're going to open it up to any of your questions. This is my contact information, and the SICM website's on there. Check out our Facebook and our Instagram page. Of course, we have social media. We're always sharing images and of things that you can do to get involved.